post-Tyrion chapter of A Storm of Swords, Oberyn arrives in King's Landing wanting justice for Elia and her children. But what does Oberyn really mean? What is justice? And why now? And how does Oberyn wish to achieve justice? Well, let's start with the big question. What is justice? It's a tough question to answer, as justice may be like pornography in that we can't define it, but we know it when we see it. Justice is something that has something to do with fairness and law, and perhaps making the world a better place, and it's something that's clearly perverse in Westeros. In fact, our story opens with Bran observing justice on Garrett, a Night's Watch deserter. It's an action that naturally doesn't sit well with us, the readers. It's the law of the land and thus nominal justice, but we know it isn't real justice. Of course, the real backwardness of Westerosi justice takes center stage when Tyrion is arrested and put on trial in the Eyrie. The idea that real justice could possibly be served in any way by a trial by battle is absolutely laughable. Among the many things wrong with Tyrion's trial, justice cannot be served via proxy. Another thing that is so fundamentally off about Westerosi justice is that it's often conflated with vengeance. Do we have your leave to take our vengeance against Sir Gregor then? Vengeance? I thought we were speaking of justice. Burning Clegane's fields and slaughtering his people will not restore the king's peace, only your injured pride. Ned makes the point that justice should be focused on those who committed the crime, and in creating a greater peace. Clegane's small folk are innocent and therefore should not be punished. Ned specifically tells us that it's not justice when others are hurt and when things escalate out of control. Then it becomes vengeance. Of course, this is not just an indictment of Westeros, but war itself. Soldiers and civilians pay for the crimes of their leaders. George R. R. Martin is clearly making the statement that there is no justice in war. War is as morally bankrupt as a trial by battle. After all, that's what it is precisely. So as Ned says, there is justice and there is vengeance, and many characters seem to conflate the two concepts. Would that a council seat were all Martell came to claim. You promised him vengeance as well. I promised him justice. Call it what you will, it still comes down to blood. It occurred to me as I was pissing that this plan of yours may not yield you what you want. And what is it that I want, sir? The Sand Snakes freed, vengeance for Oberyn and Elia. Do I know the song? You want a little taste of lion blood? I want justice. Call it what you will. He has gone to bring us back our heart's desire. What is our heart's desire? Vengeance, justice, fire and blood. So unlike Ned, Tywin, Darkstar, and Dorne all conflate justice and vengeance. It's all blood to them, or so they claim. So I do wonder, did Oberyn know the difference between justice and vengeance? Well, that's a complicated issue, and even the Martells don't agree. Interestingly, Oberyn himself never uses the word vengeance, only justice. However, Ellaria says that Oberyn did want vengeance. Oberyn wanted vengeance for Elia. Now the three of you want vengeance for him. I have 4 daughters, I remind you. Your sisters. My Elia is 14, almost a woman. Obella is 12, on the brink of maidenhood. They worship you, as Doria and Loreza worship them. If you should die, must Elle and Obella seek vengeance for you, then Doria and Loree for them? Is that how it goes, round and round forever? I ask again, where does it end? So Ellaria rejects the mindset of vengeance, but she does believe it was Oberyn's mindset to some extent. The Sandstakes mock Ellaria for her views, believing that vengeance should extend to all of House Lannister. It ends in blood as it began. It ends when Casterly Rock is cracked open so the sun can shine on the maggots and the worms within. It ends with the utter ruin of Tywin Lannister and all his works. The Sand Snakes then insult Ellaria and claim she never really understood Oberyn. But Dorne comes to Ellaria's defense. The prince gave her a curious look. She understood more than you ever will, Nymeria. So is Oberyn's mindset like his daughter's, or is his mindset like his paramour's? What does Ellaria understand? Oberyn's mindset? The true nature of the world and the need for peace? And if Ellaria understands that, then why is Dorne claiming that vengeance, justice, and fire and blood are his heart's desire? Dorne claims that he and Oberyn were coordinating in their actions. So in that respect, you would think that Oberyn would also want vengeance, justice, fire, and blood. Then again, Dorne also speaks about protecting the innocent. And he says Ellaria knows more than Lady Nym will, ever. With all of these contradictions, it's very confused, and I would say that Oberyn's idea of justice is still a mystery. Now, shifting gears, I would say that we can view justice on 4 levels. We start with the narrowest view, the idea that only the Mountain and Amory Lorch are guilty. And this is clearly the level that the Lannisters are trying to get the Martells to accept. In fact, initially Tywin just wanted the Martells to accept the death of Amory Lorch as justice. After that, there's the idea that those that commanded the actions are also guilty. This would include Tywin and perhaps Robert as well. This is of course something that Oberyn is specifically interested in. Next comes a larger vengeance idea of justice that focuses on all of House Lannister. This is clearly the level that the Sand Snakes want. And finally, there's the idea that the entire system is broken and incapable of delivering justice. Real justice involves bringing everything down and creating an entire new system. So let's keep these 4 ideas of justice in mind when we examine Oberyn's trip to King's Landing. So Oberyn's journey to King's Landing can be broken down into 4 encounters with Tyrion. We have Oberyn's arrival in Tyrion 5 with his litter. We have Oberyn and Tyrion's discussion of Lives of 4 Kings in Sansa 4. We have Oberyn's visit to Tyrion imprisoned in his tower in Tyrion 9. And we have Oberyn preparing to do battle against the Mountain in Tyrion 10. Now we've heard a lot of things about Oberyn. He's deadly, dangerous, unpredictable. But what does Oberyn actually say and do? Well, let's really break it down. The first thing Oberyn talks about when he arrives is his trip to Casterly Rock when he was a boy. He tells Tyrion that he arrived at Casterly Rock right after Tyrion's mother's death, and everyone was claiming that baby Tyrion was a monster. He tells Tyrion about how his sister was cruel to him because she blamed him for his mother's death. Now Tyrion thinks this to be a very odd story and even asks himself, now why would he tell such a tale? So why is he telling him this? Well, it's pretty clear that the tale highlights how innocent Tyrion is and how unfair it is that he's getting blamed for his mother's death. There is no justice in blaming and punishing Tyrion for crimes he did not commit. Next, Oberyn asks Tyrion about whores and claims that he and Ellaria want to try out a blonde. Tyrion at first says he doesn't frequent whores anymore, but eventually recommends Shataya's brothel. Oberyn mocks Tyrion about a whore tax that's been implemented, and Tyrion says it wasn't his idea, it was his father's. Tywin wanted to improve the morals of the city. Oberyn and Tyrion then speak of Elia and her children. Oberyn tells Tyrion, I came for justice for Elia and her children, and I will have it. Starting with the lummox Gregor Clegane, but not, I think, ending there. Before he dies, the enormity that rides will tell me whence came his orders. Please assure your Lord Father of that. So Oberyn claims he's set on taking down the Mountain and Tywin, the man who gave the order. Oberyn, at minimum, believes in a command level of justice. Now the 2 men next run into each other after Joffrey chops up Lives of 4 Kings. And the 2 talk about a 4th subject, history. Oberyn mentions that he has read Lives of 4 Kings, but then proceeds to get facts wrong about it. Oberyn claims that the book was too kind to Viserys II, when the book actually skips over him mostly. Oberyn also claims that Viserys II only ruled a fortnight, when in fact it was a year. Oberyn finally proceeds to say that Viserys didn't do anything, which causes Tyrion to protest. Viserys didn't waste his time on war and prayer, he ruled, Tyrion claims. Now we know very little of Viserys II's reign, but apparently it involved mostly good, peaceful ruling, establishing a mint, promoting trade, reforming law. All in all, a man who focused his time on creating a better system. Now next, when Oberyn finds Tyrion in his tower, the previous conversations get turned on their head. The discussion is first of whores again. As it turns out, Oberyn lied about wanting a blonde whore. At Shataya's brothel, he claims he bedded the Summer Islander, Alayaya. Now, I see no reason why Oberyn would seek out Alayaya after claiming he and Ellaria were so desperately looking for a blonde. No, it seems Oberyn was not looking for a prostitute to fuck, but a prostitute to interrogate. Alayaya is filled with Tyrion's secrets, namely that Tyrion was having romantic rendezvous with Shae at Shataya's brothel. Not to mention the fact that Varys was making these rendezvous possible, and that Tywin had a serious problem with it. The scars on Alayaya's back that Tywin gave her being a testament to that. And Oberyn makes note of those scars. But the secrets even go beyond this. Shataya's brothel had a secret tunnel used by a previous hand, and it seems quite likely that hand was Tywin. There's even a small chance that Alayaya is Tywin's bastard. But regardless, after interviewing Shataya and Alayaya, I would say it's quite probable that Oberyn knew exactly why Tywin wanted Tyrion sent to the wall. Oberyn knew that Tywin wanted to punish Tyrion for his whoring, and it's even possible that Oberyn knew that Tywin was bedding Shae. It would explain why Oberyn was so sure of Tyrion's innocence when everyone else in the world thought Tyrion was guilty. Next in the tower, Oberyn begins telling Tyrion of history, a tale of Daeron I, of which Viserys II was his hand. So it's almost certain that Oberyn knew exactly what kind of man Viserys II was and was trying to get a rise out of Tyrion. After all, Oberyn studied at the Citadel and earned 6 links of a maester's chain. Of course Oberyn knows history. Oberyn was screwing with Tyrion, and I do wonder if Oberyn actually agreed with Tyrion about the reign of Viserys II. Now, after some discussion of succession in Tyrion's trial, the conversation goes back to justice and Elia and her children. Oberyn says there's been no justice for Elia, Aegon, or Rhaenys. Now, of course, Amory Lorch was killed, and yet Oberyn claims there is no justice for Rhaenys. So again, Oberyn must believe that something greater than the hand that did the crime represents justice. Oberyn then grills Tyrion on Tywin, wanting to hear Tyrion implicate his father. Clearly, Oberyn believes in Tywin's guilt, though it's unclear why Oberyn wants Tyrion to say it. Oberyn and Tyrion's last exchange is right before Oberyn's battle, and everything goes back to the beginning, back to Oberyn's tale about Casterly Rock. Oberyn's mother wanted Oberyn to marry Cersei, but Tywin wanted Cersei to marry Rhaegar, and in the end, Elia married Rhaegar. Oberyn implies that Tywin had Elia and her children killed as vengeance for the Martells marrying Elia to Rhaegar. Again, it's an implication of Tywin. Now, Tyrion's takeaway from Oberyn's story is this. It all goes back and back, Tyrion thought, to our mothers and fathers and theirs before them. We are puppets dancing on the strings of those who came before us, and one day our children will take up our strings and dance in our steads. So Tyrion clearly believes that the problem with justice in this world is it's systemic. Now, we don't know for certain if Oberyn is as enlightened as Tyrion, though Oberyn's knowledge of history and the reign of Viserys II seems to point in that direction. Now, one could argue that Oberyn is interested in vengeance against House Lannister, but the amount of time he puts into talking about the innocence of baby Tyrion, and the amount of time he puts into researching and defending the innocence of adult Tyrion, points to the idea that Oberyn doesn't want vengeance. He wants justice. Now, perhaps he's not really that interested in systemic justice and just wants justice for those that commanded Elia's death. But one thing is absolutely certain. Oberyn absolutely, positively wanted justice against Tywin. Not only does Oberyn say as much, but he brings up Tywin's guilt repeatedly, and discovers that Tywin wants to frame his own son and send him to the wall. So whether Oberyn believes in a systemic form of justice, or a house vengeance form of justice, or a command form of justice, there is absolutely no way that Oberyn believes in a narrow form of justice. There is absolutely no way that Oberyn is there just for the Mountain. Now you may ask, who is arguing that Oberyn went to King's Landing just for the Mountain? Well, Doran Martell for one. He claims Oberyn went to King's Landing to fight the Mountain, and that Tywin was only to die after he was stripped of all that he held most dear. Of course, Doran's statement can't possibly be true, as when Oberyn arrives, he claims he's going to get Tywin implicated. Had Tywin been implicated, he would have either been arrested or executed, or the Lannisters would have gone to war with Dorne. In neither scenario would he be stripped of all that he held most dear. Doran is just a big fat liar. This is especially true when you consider how fundamental justice for Tywin is in Oberyn's trip to King's Landing. Oberyn arrives and tells Tyrion he thinks Tywin is guilty. He then goes to the tower and tells Tyrion he thinks Tywin is guilty. And then he tells a story right before battle about how he thinks Tywin is guilty. And then in the fight itself, Oberyn screams, "You raped her, you murdered her, you killed her children." That's not what the Mountain is guilty of. The Mountain is only guilty of raping and killing Elia and killing Aegon. That is, one child, not children. And I'm not splitting hairs here. Our author is clearly aware of the difference between child and children, as the Mountain ends up only confessing to killing one child. It is Tywin who is guilty of Oberyn's chant, not the Mountain. It's all about Tywin. Now you may say, fine, Oberyn wanted justice for Tywin, and that's why he did battle with the Mountain. He wanted the Mountain to confess and implicate Tywin. After all, that's what Oberyn claimed he was going to do from the very beginning when he arrived in King's Landing. Except that plan doesn't make any sense at all. The Mountain isn't even in King's Landing when Oberyn arrives, and Tywin specifically says he's going to keep the Mountain away from King's Landing. The Mountain only returns because Joffrey dies and Tyrion is put on trial. Oberyn's plan to extract a confession lacks the most important part, the confessor. Additionally, why does Oberyn need a confession from the Mountain anyway? Oberyn is already sure of Tywin's guilt. What's the point of a confession? So we have a huge logical problem here. Oberyn clearly believes in at least a command level of justice, and is clearly very focused on delivering justice to Tywin. Additionally, he seems quite certain of Tywin's guilt. And yet he devises a seemingly needless plan that requires a confessor who isn't even in King's Landing. It's flat out ridiculous. Why didn't Oberyn just kill Tywin, a man he knows is guilty? Unless, of course, he did. And of course he did. Oberyn poisoned Tywin. Here's Pycelle's description of his poisons that he gives during Tyrion's trial. Grey cap from the toadstool, nightshade, sweet sleep, demon's dance. This is blind eye. Widow's blood. This one is called for the color, a cruel potion. It shuts down a man's bladder and bowels until he drowns in his own poisons. This wolfsbane, here basilisk's venom, and this one the tears of lice. So one of these poisons is not like the others. One of them has a long description of what it is and how it functions, and the others just have their name. Widow's blood shuts down a man's bladder and bowels, and the only way I could see this working on both bladder and bowels is if something causes the muscles to constrict. Later in that same chapter, it makes no matter, my father will never give her that choice. Your father may not live forever. Something about the way he said it made the hairs on the back of Tyrion's neck bristle. And then in the next Tyrion chapter, Lord Tywin's face was so dark that for half a heartbeat, Tyrion wondered if he'd drunk some poisoned wine as well. And finally, in the last Tyrion chapter of A Storm of Swords, for once, his father did what Tyrion asked him. The proof was in the sudden stench, as his bowels loosened in the moment of his death. Now, for most of us, we loosen our bowels the minute we sit down onto a toilet. Tywin's, though, are still constricted. So we have a man who's known for poisoning comment about how Tywin may die soon. Then we have a line that Tywin looks like he's been poisoned. Then we find him suffering from the symptoms of a poison that was conspicuously listed previously. It seems exceedingly likely that the order of events was not to fight the Mountain, get a confession, and then punish Tywin, which makes no sense since the Mountain wasn't in town and Oberyn was already sure of Tywin's guilt. No, the plan was to punish Tywin, go on trial for poisoning him, fight the Mountain, and then get the confession. Joffrey's death just screwed everything up. But why is this confession so important? Well, we'll put the pieces all together on the Westerosi front in Part 7.